Okay, so Dom, I was watching this podcast, which by the way, can I just say how weird it is that I was watching another podcast?
I know.
But, but anyway, so on it, legendary producer Rick Rubin was pontificating on how AI can't do what people do. Like he was trying to calm people's nerves down.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you say, Jenna?
All right, so basically Rick's whole point was that AI can't it has reason, but it can't do what people do because as people, you and I and everyone else, we're unreasonable. Like all of the breakthroughs that come from human innovation are because as people, we do the thing that you're not supposed to do. Kind of like this podcast, right? Like it's believing in something that shouldn't
Yes.
work.
Yes.
And so the machine can't do that. And he's like, that's why the machine can never take over what people do.
Okay. Well, that's comforting. AI can't take over all the producing and editing jobs. I mean,
I hear some
or can
trepidation.
it? Or can it? I don't know.
Well, listen, that has yet to be determined, but let's start the show and find out. Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Dom. You know what's funny? Not long ago, we were both breaking news. Now we're
Breaking unemployment records.
exactly just like thousands of other journalists who've been laid off from newsrooms across the country.
Yeah, and after the shock wore off, we kept asking ourselves, what the hell do we do now?
And over many, many cups of coffee,
And maybe a few drinks.
we realized we had a unique opportunity here. Why not pull back the curtain on what's really happening in American media?
Right? I mean, we've spent years in this industry seeing how stories get made or don't, and now we can actually talk about it.
And trust me, there's a lot to talk about. From local news disappearing to social media reshaping journalism, we'll break it all down.
And look, we're not here to lecture anybody. We just want to help make sense of the information that we're getting and maybe have some much needed fun along the way.
So whether you're glued to the news, just trying to figure out what's real in your feed, or curious about the future of media, come hang with us.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking, a podcast where two journalists
Are taking a critical look at American media. So, Jenna, what made you think of that Rick Rubin quote?
Well, so here's the thing. I remember being in a meeting once where senior leadership was gleefully talking about saving money using AI as an editor.
But you mean for like editing video, right? Is that what you
Oh,
mean?
yeah. But my whole thing, first of all, that chilled my soul when I heard it. And my whole thing is like, once you start relying on the machine, can you really stop?
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. I mean, there was this article, I think, I brought it up with you. That was I guess in the summer. The Guardian had reported how NewsCorp Australia, which is a company owned by Rupert Murdoch, has a bunch of newspapers, and they basically the Guardian reported how News Corp had introduced this tool called News GPT. So it's an AI it's a generative AI tool, and one of the tools in that News GPT that they created for their papers is an editor tool. Now, this editor tool is supposed to adopt the persona of an editor. So it's supposed to help generate leads or fresh angles. At least that's how it's been used now. It's not meant to, like, they're not creating this GPT tool to replace people. It's meant to, I guess, help in certain ways. But, my question is, I get where we all start. It always starts in this place, right? It always starts at a place where nobody's ever looking to, allegedly, nobody's ever looking to replace people. But as the tool develops in time, could it? I mean,
Mm.
could a tool like an AI tool replace a human editor in terms of
Or could you
kind
have
of,
the excuse to let go of a human editor
of
because this
course.
this computer tool, it's good enough.
I mean, yes, exactly. It's like, but it always starts there for me. It's like, you start with these places, and with AI, I think people just don't know necessarily how it's developing so fast and changes so fast. So you really don't know, could it be replacing real humans in terms of jobs that ordinarily you'd be like, no, there's no way. Only a human could do that job. I don't know.
Yeah, well, listen, we reached out to an expert on story shaping, aka editing, to find out. Artificial intelligence is moving really, really fast, but so are newsroom layoffs. Cash strapped organizations are increasingly tempted to replace human work with AI tools that promise speed and efficiency without those pesky needs of things like healthcare coverage. But is that dangerous for journalism? Can an algorithm really do the job of an editor that's shaping stories, holding writers accountable, pushing them forward, and building trust with audiences? So we decided to reach out to Sisi Wei, Chief Impact Officer of CalMatters, formerly editor-in-chief of the Markup, and a longtime leader in data journalism and newsroom innovation. She's also co-executive director of Open News Source, and her work bridges, deep tech expertise with editorial leadership. Cece is uniquely qualified to talk about what AI means for journalism, especially in the high-stakes role of editing. So welcome to Laid Off and Looking, Cece.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
No, it's super awesome to have you on the show. So I'm sort of wondering, first of all, for people who might not be familiar with all of those media outlets that I listed in the intro, can you tell us what they are and I guess sort of like what their purpose is for people who might be like, wait, I've never heard of like Call Matters.
Yes, absolutely. And so CalMatters is about California, and it is the statewide nonprofit news source for all things policy, politics, how it actually hits home and affects people. And the Markup, which merged with CalMatters last year, is a nonprofit journalism newsroom that is all about reporting on technology and also challenging technology to actually serve the public. And so these two orgs came together, and now we're doing both of those things with a really big focus on California. And you can sort of imagine with all of the AI regulation in California currently and so many tech companies being based there, how that comes together. A lot of my personal history, however, has been in data journalism, in data visualization. That's how I grew up in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I also spent a lot of time, as you mentioned, at Open News when I was co-ED there. A lot of my work was about tackling big issues of things like equity in journalism as an industry and how do we do that.
Well, when it comes to editing, I mean, again, for people who might not be as familiar with that role in any sort of like news organization, we're talking about more than just fixing grammar or correcting mistakes or something like that.
Yeah, we're talking about, okay, a reporter has an idea for an article or maybe a source that's telling them about something, and editors guide that reporter through the whole process. They're basically like partners in action, right? How far do I take this? What kind of good question should I ask? Or a source just told me something totally contradictory to another source. How do I pursue this further? There's 10, maybe 100 ways you could write a story, and trying to figure out what is the right way to do it. What's the angle we want? Who are all the voices that we want included? There's so many things that you do together. And an editor is really there with reporters at like all their critical moments and whenever they need help too.
Of course, of course. Okay. So, one of the things, just to help contextualize the conversation that we're going to continue with, is how did your background, because again, talking about California and the role that, with Silicon Valley and everything, I guess, did you see tech influencing journalism?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I think the influence of tech on journalism has been monumental for quite some time now. So in our history, and I mean, everybody who's been at least plugged into the internet in some way has been affected, and journalism especially so. So if you imagine, like, if I even skip things before the internet, like radio and TV, if you imagine how the internet changed how information moves, like who gets to be a gatekeeper of information anymore,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Everyone can publish,
Mhm.
right? Like anyone can get information out there. They can also get misinformation out there. But it's no longer locked behind, do you have access to spending money to print a lot of physical pieces of paper and then deliver it to people, right? It's just instant. And if you move forward a little bit, then we get into this world of like algorithms. And that's what the Markup, when it was created, was really created as a newsroom to hold accountable, is like, what are we using technology to do? How's the government using it? How are companies using it? And what are they using it for? How does the Uber driver algorithm work? And on the flip side, how does the payment to those drivers work, right? So there's already all these changes. And then, of course, artificial intelligence arrives on the scene. And as you've talked about already, it's changing how a lot of companies work. There's a lot of hype around it. And for us ourselves, not only have we covered AI and its effects on people, and we've also, as a newsroom, grappled with how exactly are we willing to use AI in order to do journalism, right? And something that I'm very proud of is that for us as a newsroom, we've committed to the fact that like AI for us is not a reason to lay people off, to reduce work for journalists. It's in fact the opposite, which is it's an avenue where our journalists can use it to do things that maybe they hate doing because it's so arduous, or in an even more useful sense, things that can help them find insights way more quickly so they can actually do more stories as opposed to trying to replace the journalist and the editor.
Well, that makes
Well,
more sense.
yeah. Well, Cece, obviously this year, Jen and I, we are looking at what role does AI play in journalism? And we're new to this, trying to understand it just like I think everybody else is too. And where do you see the positives? Obviously, you've talked about your organization, how you see it, but how do you see it in journalism as a whole? Like, what are you seeing right now where AI, how is it being used? Is it being used? Are you concerned about how you're seeing some organizations or where it might be headed? Are you not concerned? Like, what are the positives and negatives you're seeing from your perspective so far, but outside of where you work?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I'm seeing lots of mistakes and I'm also seeing lots of points of inspiration just
Okay.
across the gamut, right? It's like journalism is trying a lot of different things. Some of it I feel like makes no sense, like using it to literally pump out articles that are written about by AI. And we've seen the news articles about places that even also made up the contributors' names to go
Mm-hmm.
on
Which is
those.
Mm-hmm.
wild. Why would you
It's
do that?
it doesn't make sense to me because journalism is an industry that's based on trust. Like we want
Mm-hmm.
people to believe us,
Mm-hmm.
therefore we do all of these steps to be trustworthy
Mm-hmm.
and worthy of that trust, literally, right? And so those uses of AI, I don't know how that could end up benefiting us in any way. There are other uses of AI which I feel like are really smart experiments that people are trying. Like there are newsrooms that tried to use an AI chatbot to help answer basic election questions for people. And they gave it clear boundaries. Like they wrote all the content and what the answers should be based on the types of questions. And so then no matter how you word your question, it'll be like, yes, the day that you vote is this day, or the place that you go is this place. And like people trying to see, is that better than us, say, writing an FAQ? Like, does that help people more because they get to have an interactive experience? But then the other thing is like, people who are really trying to use it as a way to augment how they do their reporting and to go through massive troves of documents and data in a more efficient way. Can you do that? Within journalism, I mean, there's so many other examples, but just like you see the mistakes and you see things that are like, like maybe we should see more of that. And where could that actually go?
I think it's interesting because sometimes, like looking from the outside, you can get a little. I mean, speaking as a journalist, like you get a little concerned because you say, "Wow, should I be more nervous about this?" And I think it's like we don't want to make people scared about AI because I think that's the instant reaction is to be scared of what's happening. It's new, but I'm sure listen, when the internet started and people were concerned about misinformation and what's on there, so how concerned should we sort of temper how concerned we are with this new technology?
I think, yes, I think we have to take a measured, like, this is a tool, right? This technology is a tool. And you can easily exploit any tool to do bad things for society, like become a misinformation farm, right? Let's say you can use it to set up a website that looks legitimate and just has stuff you've made up, and you can now make up, troves and troves of that very quickly. On the flip side, you can also use a tool to do constructive, helpful things. And you can use it to say, parse every single thing that the legislature has said and try to pull out what's contradictory or what's interesting or what could I write a story about. And I think our concerns really have to be around how people are choosing to use AI and not the fact that, generally speaking, AI now exists. Because that's just a reality, right? Like the technology is built.
Hmm.
And it's up to us actually as human beings. Like, what do we want to use the things we build for? You know, and
Hmm.
what values do we come to when we're using those things?
Well, what I guess advice, here we go, is that's what I'm looking for. What advice would you give to a journalist who perhaps is like one of the few reporters who's left working at a small newsroom and yet they've perhaps overheard people in leadership saying things like, "Oh my God, this new technology is great. We can use this instead of, insert job title and actual human being here." Is I'm really not sure, but I've heard that from a few people those are conversations that they've overheard. And how do you ensure, or is there even a way to ensure that at least the work that has your real life human name attached to it um, is still trustworthy?
I think, one thing that a lot of newsrooms I've seen do is you could talk about creating some sort of transparent AI policy for your readers. Like, what are the instances that we are using it, and what are the instances in which we don't use it, right? Like I would say most places do not use AI to write their articles, right? Like that is a small handful of very clear examples that have been reported on by journalists who are not using AI to do that reporting. Um, but I think I would say in a lot of newsrooms, I understand, and in many ways, like there are things I find really useful about using AI as an editor, like a brainstorming partner when I get stuck, like what is the best headline I could write for something? The one I wrote, I feel meh about, and I want it to give me some prompts to help me make it better, right? Like there's things like that where it's a totally, I think, just like a tool-based reason to use it. But if it, I think the scariest thing, right? And when it comes to advice is when you feel like things are floating in the air, but you don't know what's going to happen and people aren't talking about it. I think the real, group discussion to be had, especially if you're feeling nervous, if you're feeling anxious because you're like, what is the decision that's going to be made? I would actually take a more proactive approach if you're comfortable and to
Hmm.
say, like, let's talk as a newsroom about how we will use it and where we won't. And do that one step at a time. We don't have to come up with our entire policy all in one go. It's not very practical. But like, what are some things we are comfortable using it for? And what are some things where here's why a human being ultimately responsible for it is necessary in our industry?
Well, I also would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that it's not just the trust impact of AI, but it's also the environmental impact of AI. Um, yeah, just not only the fact that some communities are seeing their electricity costs go up because perhaps I don't know, like a station or a sub hub or something like that
Like a
has been
data
a
center.
data center, there we go, has been set up and is using electricity from whatever their provider is, and that cost is being passed on to uh, the customers. But then there's also the water usage. We're already hearing stories that this could be incredibly damaging to our drinking water supply.
Yeah, this is something that our engineers and myself, we grapple with a lot. Like, how do you responsibly use a piece of technology that is currently very energy hungry and has all of these effects on communities based on what the companies themselves, or the companies that are building these tools are choosing to do and how they source their energy. And, the closest thing that we have found is that something that most people don't know is that you can use AI just on your laptop. You don't have to use it online. And so there are apps out there that you can easily find by doing a search that allow you to download little micro versions of these AI models and just put it on your computer so that it uses significantly less resources. But then it's also about the decisions that we make along the way. Like what makes sense to use AI for, and what do we have other tools for that are
Hmm.
readily going to help you with something, right? Like there are lots of tools we use in journalism and other industries to help you design your social media posts, or lay out your PowerPoint presentations and things like that. And I think it's like up to each of us there. It's like I don't want people to shy away from using it, because if we don't use it, we'll never learn how to use it well. But at the same time, like I'm not using it to do every little thing in my life because I don't need it to do that. And I would rather not have that energy expenditure.
It's so interesting because I think that's something that, listen, when I use AI, when I experiment with it too, like I'm learning how to be a little bit more smarter in how I research with it, because I've learned also is like every time you think like, oh, I'll just follow up this question, like you're not really thinking it through because you just think, and that's, I guess that's really a big point is working smarter with it, but not necessarily being scared to use it, just learning how to ask smarter questions. And I guess as time goes on, because this is all still really new, we're still figuring this part out. How concerned are you with that being moving forward, the better we, I guess, the more integrated it gets into workplaces? How concerned would you be in terms of environmentally the kind of impact it can have? And what does that
Yeah.
really?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest question mark for me is that I don't know where that's going, right? Like, are we going to enter a universe in which the energy use gets a lot more efficient, right? Or is it always going to be like the equivalent of a Hummer versus a, mid-sized car,
Yes,
right?
yes,
And like I think it's all TBD right now. Like we don't know because the technology is moving. So we know there's a huge gap right now, right? Like searching on Google is significantly fewer resources than searching on, say, ChatGPT. However, this technology is very new compared to other technologies. And we know that technology changes over time. And I feel like this is something I'm watching very closely for this reason. And I think it's also really important that people pay attention to these sort of effects of AI in their communities. And we see in different states people making decisions about whether or not they actually want to regulate, right? Like, do we want our customers to take on this cost? And there's people doing really good work in that space right now to really try to tackle that. And I'm watching that very closely too.
Just to go back even a little bit to the editing side of how tools that are being used, AI being used. That there was an article in the Guardian like a month ago, and it was talking about Rupert Murdoch's Australian newspapers that were experimenting with their own in-house version of AI, and one of them had it was about an editor, and they kind of said that they were using it to similarly to like what you mentioned before. It's the that particular version that's an editor is meant to adopt a persona of an editor, but also help generate story leads and that kind of thing. But there are, of course, like with anything, we all get concerned. Like people say that, and they said that they're not looking to replace positions. Like I think the News Corp mentioned that they weren't looking to replace positions. It was meant to be a tool used with their employees. But we all know, we all get concerned when we hear big corporations starting to say, we're going to integrate this into everything we do. The concern is it's going to start eliminating jobs. How do you think it's possible for AI to replace a human editor at a news organization? Is that even possible at this point?
I would say that it is not possible if what you want is quality journalism at the end of the day, right? Like that has to be your end goal. Uh, you can use the AI editor to do many things. You could use it to write a jokes blog. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But like
Mm-hmm.
if what you want is quality journalism, the things that you need, uh, ultimately, I mean, you go back to what happens when it gets something wrong. Who's responsible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like I don't know an editor who would be comfortable saying, well, the AI said it was fine. You know, like that's not that is not something that anybody I know in journalism would be comfortable with. And so like that's the core of it, right? Our goal is different than just putting words and pictures and video on the internet. We have a very specific goal, which is we're reporting on new information or information that like is not yet reported or needs to be reported live. And we want it to be quality. We want it to be like something that makes sense to people, not just like
Mm-hmm.
so and so said this the end, right? But we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to like connect dots. We're trying to get different perspective, and to have an editor, play that role of like holding reporters accountable for their own work. Like you can't rely on AI to do that. You can rely on AI to do things like how could I phrase this better so that more people understand it? Give me some suggestions, right? Like there's lots of things that can help you improve on. But on that ultimate level of like, are we doing the work that we as journalists set out to do? And an editor's eye and helping you make sure that that's happening. Like that's not something that I would ever rely on a piece of technology to take responsibility for.
Well, that's interesting because that reminds me of an interview that the infamous, famous producer Rick Rubin once did, and he was talking about, the role of AI and how that might impact music production. And he was like, honestly, it reflects what's already been done, but it's not forward thinking. It doesn't necessarily have a point of view. And that for him, the artists that he works with, that's the draw, is that they have a point of view. And from my experience, every time I've ever worked with an editor, they always were there to help me as a reporter shape, what was the narrative or the point of view that the story was going to have, and what is the new thing that I'm finding or that I'm looking for that I'm going to be presenting to the audience, which again, as you're sort of saying, if the machine only knows what's already been done, you're never going to get that anyway.
Right. Right. It's not built for that, right? It's not built to actually create new information that is real information in the world. It's great at like creating uh like things out of putting words together, right? And I say it that way because that's fundamentally what it's actually doing. Is if you're working with a text chatbot, right? What it's
Mm-hmm.
doing is drawing upon the, let's just say, bajillions of examples that it has in its bank of how sentences have been written, how the words get put together, in what order and why, right? And like, why is this pattern? The classic example is like, the dog was chasing the blank, right? And as human beings, we have a few guesses about what that could be. And AI just knows that the next word has a, say 32% likelihood of being squirrel and a 2% likelihood of being rock, right? Or something like that. And it's using this sort of conception of our language to put these words together. And it's using only historic information. It can't tell you the future. It can be a facsimile of a conversationalist. But in journalism, what we're looking for is actually, the next rough draft of history every single
Yeah.
time. And we're constantly bringing in new information to the world because we talk to somebody or we are live, witnessing something that we're reporting on. And so it's a different ball game in that area.
Well, I also wanted to go back to something that caught my ear when you were talking about just the urgency and the need to get, words and pictures and videos on the internet. Is there any concern that, again, what I consider to be very much an art form of creating journalism has somehow in this digital age gotten flattened into just content? And we just need to be pushing out more content. Because, again, one of the things that I am getting from this is that, listen, as former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg used to say, we're going to do more with less. So if that's the case. Um, is there sometimes when I hear that, I get concerned that I'm like, but this isn't should we be calling it content? Am I being too sensitive? Maybe that's what I'm asking. This could be a question for my therapist. I don't know.
Oh my gosh. I mean, so here's what I will say is that, so I personally do not have a big reaction to the word content. But here's why, right? It's not because I don't have the same worries that you just outlined, which is I don't want our quality work to get flattened to this like weird word that doesn't have any particular connotation or meaning or even quality implied to it. But the reason why I'm not personally affected by this sort of contentness of how we talk about it is because I've also long been an advocate of like, journalism is not articles. Journalism is not video. Journalism is the transference of quality information from one human being to many other human beings, right? Like we are trying to report out good quality information that helps people understand their world, shows wrongdoing when we find it. And like, I don't particularly care what is the actual mechanism, like the format that we use to express that information. I just want it to get to people and to communities that can actually find this information helpful and useful so they can live their lives. They can make good decisions. They can make informed decisions, right? And so, like, if we suddenly lived in a world where all we did was write 140 character, messages in threads to each other, like, that's fine if the quality information is getting connected. And I think, what we're seeing now around how it works is like quite transformative, because what we're learning and why content is being used in this way is because, say, vertical video is blowing up, and like
Oh,
generations that highly prefer to receive information this way, right? And like I tried it and now I love it. Like I actually, for some types of information, I just want you to explain it to me in 30 seconds. That's what I want. For other types of information, I want to read a very long deep dive because I want to know everything there is to know about it. And so, content, I think you can just take it to mean we're getting information to people. Obviously, there's going to be industries that mean other things and use that word to mean other things, but I'm not too bothered by it overall. I don't think it's making people like, dumber or desensitized to good information as a word.
okay. Well, then one more follow up on my worry thread, if you will. And that is that especially with the blow up of 9 by 16 video content, and let's just keep it real here. At this point, TikTok. Um,
Mm-hmm.
is there any concern that because more and more people are going there to get updates on information and refreshing their page to find out, that there isn't necessarily discernment between what is straight reporting and what is perhaps opinion and what is influencing? Because every
Mm.
so often a kerfuffle blows up where, like, see, we can't trust anybody over something that, again, from my perspective, having worked in news, I'm like, but that was never journalism. That was, wait, okay, we're not speaking the same language anymore.
Yeah. I honestly, so here's my hot take on this. I think that
I love a hot
journalism,
take.
my hot take, I think journalism as an industry has done a terrible job explaining to other people what we do, right? I think that we spent so much time just assuming
Hmm.
that people are
Hmm.
like, because it's journalism, it means A, B, C. We know exactly how journalism works. Because it's in this format, it's somehow special and elevated, and we don't take the time to actually explain that to people. And the is it opinion or is it journalism problem is classic, right? Like when you talk to non-journalists, nobody understands the difference between the opinion section and then your reporting section. Like that's not a common thing people get. And we know this, and yet we continue not to describe it very well, right? And so I don't fault the public, right? Or just like a random person using TikTok if they can't discern the difference, because I feel like we're taking a lot of people for granted in that way. And so if entire new generations don't get it because they're not buying into the old artifacts that gave journalism prestige, like it's actually on us to be clear about, hey, I'm a reporter. I've covered this issue for 10 years and I particularly pay attention to this type of story. Here's what I found today. And to like do all the things we normally do, right? We cite our sources, we make clear attributions, but we have to do it in a way that's accessible to everybody. And we need to do it all the time. Like we can't do it once and be like, oh, they'll remember from that other video how this
Hmm.
works. Like I think that is the difference. And it's also the difference between people who don't identify as journalists in any way, right? They probably identify as an influencer.
Hmm.
And there's a difference between the influencers that people really trust and how they establish why they should be trusted, right? Like, I'll give you an example. I follow a lot of cosmetic chemists on TikTok. And it's because I'm so fascinated when they break down like the chemical compounds in like the lotion that you're using or like the latest, new chemical that's trending in skincare or whatever. And they talk about like, hey, this is the bucket of misinformation. Don't believe this because here's the research and it doesn't support that. And I work in this field all day long, right? And like that's their way of establishing that trust. And then there are other people who are like, I love it. You should buy this thing, right? And that's a very different
Hmm.
no effort to establish credentials or why you would know about this or why you should trust me kind of a thing. And you're going to see that in every industry, every way
Hmm.
of communicating. And honestly, I think like as journalists, we need to tell our own story about how we do our work a lot better
That's,
and
y-
everywhere.
and I don't think it's new. It feels very new right now because we're in the moment of TikTok and you have everything's happening at once. But if we look back, cable news did the exact same thing. When cable news came out, a lot of reporting on there is opinion. And you look at the prime time programs of all the cable news channels, they're opinion based. most of them, and therefore you kind of have this, the audience is listening and like, oh wow, for like 20 years they were the ones who kind of controlled how the news. I mean, I worked in cable news, and I mean it was something that I know that, fact based was, you really were kind of tied into, depending on your host you had, they were giving their opinion mixed with real fact-based news, but they are giving an opinion and they come from perspective, and that never really felt like it was, as you were saying, I don't think enough journalism has done a really good job of differentiating. This is opinion based. This is an opinion based program. We're not doing, everything kind of comes across as, well, did you hear what they just said? And I think like I think, don't you think like has journalism always had this fault really of kind of just not being very good, and the same goes for print or for radio. All of them have kind of, have they ever, we've had, I forgot who we had on, Jenna, but we had somebody on talking about like op-ed pieces and how there's not enough done in terms of making it clear it's op-ed and not fact based, or it's not journalism in that
This is
sense.
someone's professional hot take, if you will.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, even the word op-ed, like how many people actually know what that means, right? It's even, I think I don't want to make it too scary of a problem, right? Because I think actually we can explain the
Mhm.
difference if we take the time to do it, right? Like even like for example, what we do at CalMatters, it's not fancy, it's not like a special design. There's basically just a paragraph on everything that's commentary because we invite different people to write commentaries and publish it.
Mhm.
And we say like, so and so runs this other organization and works on these issues. And then we say this is guest commentary. That means, and then we explain it, right? And then we run the piece, right? It's not fancy. It's literally just some words that we added for clarity. um, but it's not apparent everywhere. It's something that you have to teach every time because you can't assume that people know these jargony words that we use in journalism to differentiate things that are actually really important to us.
I mean, most definitely. And I do think that's something that, at least from my experience, that is taken for granted. Because I do remember once an editor telling me that, like, well, we report here and the audience has to meet us here. And even then, in like the aughts, I was like, are we sure? But anyway, I want to move the conversation forward because I could keep circling this point. Um, when it comes to Cal Matters and the markup, excuse me, not plural. Can you tell us about the investigations that have been done into data brokers and that the fact that this has become almost like the new gold rush, if you will, to keep the California theme going here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've done some pieces lately that we're looking at, data protection is really important to markup coverage and to privacy coverage overall because it is the digital currency that people are using. And the cost of it is sort of your individual information. And the reason why people want it is very simple, right? Is because they want to be able to better advertise to you, to help you, to help sell you things that you would want to buy. That is the good version of that. But what that means, right, is that like there's been a lot of regulation, especially in California, on how people's data can actually be bought and if your own right to say, I don't want my data to be included in this. And so two of our reporters, Colin and Tomas, recently did this incredible piece that was looking at how we went through like, hundreds of data broker websites. And by California law, they are required to have a way for you to opt out, essentially, right? And all of those sites, the opt out pages, we found multiple examples where companies were hiding that page from actually showing up in Google search. And so if you were to search for it, you just, how else do people find websites these days, right?
Yeah.
There's been a whole monopoly lawsuit around Google around this, in fact. But by virtue of doing that, what are you doing? Are you making it harder for people to opt out of their data collection and for you to sell it? The answer is yes, right? Just because of how we work. And so we did that story. We contacted all the companies where we found this. A good number of them said, we did not mean to do that. And we're going to fix it right away. And then they did. And now their results are actually searchable on Google. Other people totally ignored us, didn't respond. And there was a handful of companies that said, well, the reason why we do this is because we don't want to get spammed. So we have a form, people can fill it out, but if you make that available, then every spam bot is going to try to fill it out. There's some degree of reality in that. Like if you actually make it really easy for people to opt out because you build an excellent form, spam bots may actually be more attractive to that, right? But there are tons of pages where there was no form at all, just information, and it was being hidden from Google search. So we saw some very real impact from that. There's now interest sort of on the senator front in tackling this more and contacting the companies, and we reported on that as well. But it's just sort of this constant vigilance. Like it's already hard for people to know, where's my data going? Do I have any control over it whatsoever? And as the state government of California tries to help make that easier, you still are able to find these instances of companies kind of like getting away with these practices that take advantage of digital tools and how they work to make something more or less accessible for people. And our job is kind of to point that out, right? Our job as journalists is to find these instances
Mm-hmm.
and make it transparent so that people can decide, well, what do you think about that? Is that correct? Does that follow the law? For the people who enforce it, now they know, right? So just getting that information to people.
Well, just one quick follow-up. Is there a chance that that kind of data could be something else that's fed to AI to make that system smarter? And I'm using air quotes for people not watching. Because again, we're learning more and more that, AI with its limitations, it can't go past like paywalls and things like that. So it relies on Reddit more and more and more. Like that seems like that would be enticing information that if I was running one of those artificial intelligence companies, I'd want access to that data. It's just going to help feed my algorithm, et cetera.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that, I mean, so AI is very information hungry, but what it really wants is like troves and troves of like examples that it can pull from, right? So like how people, every single paper about something, or like it wants journalism articles, right? That's why AI companies are making deals with journalism companies to say, we want to suck in all of your archives and we'll pay you a certain amount of money for that. It wants all that data. Now, does it want your personal data in the same way? It's actually the first time I'm thinking about it in that way. And I'm not sure because the AI companies, I mean, like they need to have a way to target you specifically as an individual to want that data. That's why like every advertiser under the sun wants it. But
Mm-hmm.
AI is actually not something that we use quite at that level yet, right? Because it's like not grown up enough, right? Advertising isn't a part of AI yet. I'm sure it will be,
I was
right?
going to
Like
be like, I'm shocked that it's not.
coming. It's coming.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if it never comes to AI. But as soon as advertising, like targeted advertising hits AI, that is when that data will become very valuable to AI.
And which brings us actually to a fascinating article that CalMatters covered, which was about how you used AI on your story about how Meta brings in millions off of political violence.
Yeah.
Um, can you explain a little bit in that investigation, like how you, I guess, give a little context, like how what the story is about, but also how you used AI to sort of research on Meta and how they, yeah, how they basically made
How
money
they
off
meta,
of
how meta metas.
how
How they
Meta.
did it. Yeah. So basically, this is an investigation that we did, I think last year at this point, where we were looking specifically around the fact that a lot of people advertise on Facebook, right? Like it's such a huge market. And Meta makes a lot of money off of that. And we were specifically trying to figure out of that money, how much of it is it coming off of advertising that takes advantage of political violence
Mm.
specifically, right? So something happens, and then you suddenly see this swell of advertising that's trying to get you to like buy merchandise around this violence, or that kind of a thing. And our reporters had seen examples of it and had a suspicion, which is why we wanted to test this theory. And something that we did in this case is that we actually used Meta's own AI model called Llama to analyze its own advertisements and try to figure out how much money was it generating. And I think that choice was also something like irresistible, right? Like if we're going to use AI, use the company's own AI
Yeah.
to audit their own stuff. Like, why not? And so I believe what we did was we had that model look at 4,000 plus ads and all the different companies that had been sort of posting those ads, what was in them, et cetera. And we wanted it to evaluate like the text, right? And is it related to specifically what we were looking at was the Trump assassination attempt?
Hmm.
Is it related to that moment of political violence? And then afterward, we checked its work. We manually reviewed the hundreds of ways that these ads were classified to make sure that it was going the right direction. It wasn't making stuff up, right? And it was getting us what we needed. And so after that, what we really found is that it was like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then over like a much larger period of time, right? We know that it's bringing in millions of dollars off of ads for political violence just for posting it. Not like you
Hmm.
going and buying the stuff, but
Hmm.
rather just people being able to post these ads and pay Meta to do that.
Which is so fascinating because you even talked about the situation in Gaza, the war and how people make money off of the war. And I think that's something that, isn't there supposed to be some kind of stopgap that Meta is not supposed to be making money off of this, that they should be much better at stopping that information from being on there or advertising?
Yeah, I think advertising is actually much more regulated than just anything that anybody posts as a category. But I also think that
Hmm.
this is something, yeah, well, it's because there's advertising laws generally, right? And so they get applied to
Okay.
advertising on a social media platform versus general
Oh,
posting is like
okay. Because
free
I'm like,
speech,
yeah,
right?
okay, yeah. Wow.
Yeah. But I think, the other thing is like what is and not allowed on social media platforms. We're seeing that change constantly, right? Like this is kind of up in the air right now in terms of what are they responsible for keeping on and off their platform, period. That benchmark has moved in the last couple of years. And also what are they pledging to keep on and off their platform? That also has moved in the last couple of years. So that's kind of a moving target.
Okay. Well, um, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about something that you had brought up to us that I thought was really, really cool. And that is the Digital Democracy Project. Tell us all about that because that is one of those things that I'm like, yes, technology, instead of like, oh, Jesus, technology.
Yeah. I mean, this project, it's something that we're so incredibly proud of. Digital democracy, for folks who
Rightfully
have never
so.
heard of it. Just basically imagine this, right? We are sucking up the data from the state government, everything that a legislator votes on, how they voted on it, if they chose not to vote, how much money are they getting from funders and people who want to sway them one way or another. Exactly what did they say about every single issue on the assembly floor? Like we are basically processing hundreds of data streams into one central database about everything our representatives are actually doing. And then what we do with that data is try to find good stories that journalists should write about it. And we propagate that information to any journalist in California that wants it. We've trained so many different newsrooms. Dave Lesher, who sort of really founded this project, has personally traveled around California, gone into newsrooms, and taught journalists how to use it. Because there's the public side where, like anybody in the public, if you're curious about it, you can look up so many things about your local representative. But for journalists, this is the part where the way that we use technology to help journalism is that it is not possible for me as a human being to process all of this information. It's overwhelming. It's like literally
Totally.
impossible, right? What it does is it uses signals that we have told it. Like when somebody votes against a major donor, that could be a story, for example. And it's checking hundreds of these rules that we've taught it over time so that every day it can surface, hey, this might be a story you're interested in. Here's the data I pulled up on it from the database. And then it allows our reporters to go out there and follow up on it, decide if it's a story, and then write about it if it is. And the most incredible one that it caught, which I think is really of note because as someone who grew up in data journalism, like this is something that I know would take a really long time to figure out. The idea was there was a tip that our technology had brought up to our reporters that was like, hey, it sounds like a lot of people, a lot of bills are dying because nobody is voting, and not because they voted no. It's because they're just not voting at all. And our reporter looked into it. It was an explosive story. There were really popular bills that died this way. And it had this sort of monumental effect when it came out because it was the first time really that someone had done an investigation in which legislators are choosing not to vote in, especially in a place like California, where it's a hugely dominated by a single political party. And there was like all of this chatter about it. We're still following up on it now, but there were so many moving stories about people who had found out that they had no idea that bills that they had advocated for, people who had traveled to the Capitol to really talk about these bills and why it was important to them, to find out only that it did not pass because their legislators weren't willing to vote one way or another. It was a really powerful piece of journalism.
Oh
And that
my God.
was a tip we got from Digital Democracy, the database, right? And we're hoping that it just democratizes everybody's ability to report on their elected leaders.
Is this something that could scale across the country? And when I say across the country, I mean, yes, everybody, there's this. I'm not sure if you've seen this meme, but it's super infamous, at least in my local news world. And it's of that guy who's walking with his girlfriend, turning around, checking out the hotter chick.
Oh,
And the
uh-huh.
hotter chick
Yes.
is national politics, and the girlfriend is local politics.
Ah.
And
Oh
my
my God.
my it's so I'm sorry, that's very appropriate to me. I used to cover the State House in Albany, New York. And my question is this something because this could be so useful not just at the state level for different states, but like county government, et cetera, because so often, so many times when I would be in the field and I talk to people about local pieces of legislation, they had, we're not even talking, they had no idea, none about who and
Hmm.
what and all this. So is this something that you see spreading, perhaps?
So I will say this, it is going to a second state,
Mhm.
launching any day now.
Okay. I love a
All
stay
right.
tuned moment.
And stay tuned. It could be coming to your state depending on where you live, but I'm being very mysterious about it. Um, but I will also say, like, truthfully, it has so much potential to help people get information in a way that is so hard right now. And like, we actually recently launched something just as a test because the California legislature is sort of like uh, working for a month. They started in August and then they close in maybe next week. And then they're off for the rest of the year and they come back in January for their full
Oh,
session,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
So during this 4 week period, we actually we launched a newsletter where people could sign up for two elected officials, right? One from each sort of branch of the House there. And you sign up and we send you an email every week that's just everything your legislator did that week. How did they vote? What did they say? Like, how are the bills that they introduced? How is that going? And we're currently doing that as a beta test. And there's going to be a full launch in
Wow.
January. And I will say one piece of feedback we got right away from a local journalist was I would love to have this for our local politicians so
Mm.
that we could follow them that way. Right.
Yo, that's
Do-
something like that would be revolutionary for American politics.
But
Revolutionary.
Cece, do the politicians want that though? Do they want
Well, but yes,
this?
I also got like I could already feel the hater vibe from people.
Oh yeah.
Why
Oh,
are
you
you
know that.
in my business?
They'd be like, you don't need to know about this. Nothing to see here.
Mhm. I mean, what's so funny about this is that the launch of digital democracy really got the politicians talking, right?
Mm.
Um, and there were parts of it though that, like, I cannot take any credit for this because it happened way before I joined CalMatters. But a decision that the team had made was that they were also going to add metrics like who was the most talkative legislator, who said the most words this session, and then we started seeing, because of course, digital democracy tracks everything that they say when they're doing their jobs, people started like comparing themselves to each other and how much they showed up in the rankings of digital democracy. And we know that they pay attention to the information. It's already gone so far in like bringing transparency to it But this newsletter is sort of like our next step in trying another way to bring that transparency even further. Like I don't want to depend on people going to our database and looking up their representative every week, right? Could we deliver something to them? And it's just a really powerful, it's like a powerful example and a powerful thing that we still have to explore so many different facets of. Like, what could we do in local? Like, what other kind of effect could this have? But one step at a time. So,
Well, no, but that
Yes.
okay. Here's why I'm reacting is because, and Dom, we had on a former colleague of ours who was in New York City media, Ben Max, who is legendary in literally New York City media. But he spoke to us about a story that he reported, it was one of his bigger ones, I think, where he was just tweeting out who wasn't showing up to city council meetings and how
yes,
that was what motivated people to not get
it's
called out.
it's incredible how much that kind of transparency is able to
Mhm.
change behavior, right? Like just the fact that someone noticed and someone is going to record it. And like in many ways, that is fundamental to why CalMatters was even created in the first place. It's because newsrooms were pulling back the reporters from the state capitol. And so no one was writing about what they were doing, right? And we were like this, our founders were basically like, we can't let that happen. We absolutely need to have reporters there. And it's totally fine if everyone else uses our journalism. We just want to make sure there is someone there who's going to write that story. Who's going to say, this person took no action, right? Like it transparency makes such a difference.
So I guess now looking, obviously we know who knows where this goes, but I guess if you doing your using your best judgment, 10 years from now, where do you see how AI and journalism, like how do you see that sort of, where do you see, how do you see it being used, or how do you see, um, where do you see it going in terms of how the technology is being used? And also, where does journalism stand with it?
Yeah. Um, the closest that I can draw a parallel from is when I first got started in journalism, it was in data journalism. And it was this period where it was the like everybody needs to learn how to code period. If the two of you may remember
Yeah.
that
Oh
culturally, but I
yeah.
think it was going
Yes.
on everywhere, right? Not just journalism, right?
Hmm.
And I was always an advocate of like, if you are a journalist and you learn how to code, you open up new avenues available to you, right? Because you're able to call people out on things that you didn't have a sense of before. However, sources can also help you do that, right? So I would say, as I watched that journey over the last, 10, 15 years unfold, there's going to be a period, and I think we're in this period now of experimentation. Like we're trying to learn what to do and what not to do, right? And we're going to make a lot of mistakes. We're also going to try a lot of things that just go nowhere. And then there will be some things that will be like persistently helpful that we discover. Like if you think about how reporting back on live elections has changed over time and what we're capable of doing now and telling people on the internet when we do live election reporting is not possible before, right? And so there's going to be some things that persist that AI allows us to do that helps us so much, and we will continue to use it to do that. And then as it matures a little bit more, I think that is when you'll start to figure out, like, people always need to use it for everything, even though that's not the point, until so that they can learn exactly what it is that makes sense to use it for. And my hope, I would say, in 10 years for journalism is that we have actually a lot, like a much better common understanding of how can AI actually help us, and that we've done a lot of the exploration to sort of weed out the things where we can say, okay, like this is not it, right? And we are able to rule those things out and really focus on the places where it helps the journalism get better and therefore helps the public. So
So, last question we ask all our guests is, what led you to this path of journalism? Like, what was your path here?
yeah, so I actually came into journalism because my high school English teacher in ninth grade said to me, "Do you want to take a journalism class next year?" And it was because I loved writing, right? So I loved her class English, and I remember saying to her like, "I don't know, I don't like talking to strangers." And she had said to me, well, it's just a class. So if you don't like it, you just don't have to take the class anymore after it's done, right? And in my high school, you could take the class multiple times if you wanted to be on student paper. Lo and behold, I ended up taking the class multiple times because I loved it so much, even though there was a lot of things about journalism that was scary to me, including asking people I don't know very intensive questions. Like I remember the first time I interviewed our school principal about something that was slightly antagonistic. And I was like, how do I do this? It's extremely nervous. But as I started to get those experiences, I also made a lot of mistakes. I interviewed a lot of my friends about what they thought about whatever it was that I was writing about, which for those of you who are not in journalism, you are not allowed to do that. You cannot just interview your friends for your articles. Journalism 101, in fact. But I did that in high school because I was scared to talk to kids I didn't know, right? But that was the place to make all these mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a moment where there were stories that I wrote that I remember feeling so important to get right and also so important to get out there to my fellow classmates. And I really had that emotional moment where I was like, this could be something that is deeply meaningful to me. And I just feel it. I don't know that I could have said it like that when I was in high school, but I could feel it. And so I ultimately just couldn't stay away. At every decision point, I was like, you know what? I'll go to journalism school because I want to do that right now, And then my parents were like, don't go into journalism. Doesn't seem like a very profitable career path. And I was like, oh, but I could, if it doesn't work out, I can be a lawyer like you want. And at the end of the day, I've been in journalism ever since. I've never left for another industry. So
This industry is filled with people who started out in law school and were just like, nah, this is not the
law school is
vibe.
not for me, journalism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Cece, listen, thank you so much. This has been so informative and actually enlightening and
Mm-hmm.
hopeful, I would say for me.
Mm-hmm.
I really want the democracy project to spread. Um,
Yes.
so yes, I'm in the stay tuned position, I guess, to find out what happens next, because that sounds super awesome. But thank you so much for taking time to join us on Laid Off and Looking.
Thank you so much, Shiva, for having me.
Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Dominic Camia.
Music provided by Jake Howitt. Research by Laura Rothenbucker.
You can watch and follow us on YouTube.
Or you can listen and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you have any questions or suggestions, we want to hear from you. So leave a comment.
We do check them.
Or reach out to us anytime at laidoffandlookingpod@gmail.com.
New episodes every Friday.